Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second of our international panels today. This time we're turning our attention to the Canadian TV market. Glad to see a nice full room. I was a bit worried when I saw we were up against Joanna Lumley, but I needn't have worried. I did just put together my own little Canadian wall of fame there, and maybe if we get time at the end, I might do a little pop quiz, see if you can name all those famous faces there. I managed to do it without Celine Dion. I feel I did quite well there. Anyway, over the next 45 minutes, we're going to try and give you a very quick whistle-stop tour of the Canadian TV landscape. We're really going to focus on what the opportunities are for UK programme makers, such as yourselves. I guess as the prospect of a hard Brexit seems to be becoming more likely by the day, and we wonder what that's going to mean for our co-production relationships with the rest of Europe, the great news is that our friends in Canada here are ready and waiting to do business with us, and Canadian audiences and viewers, it turns out, are actually big fans of British TV. So what UK programmes are Canadian broadcasters looking to acquire and co-produce? How do we navigate the sometimes seemingly complex kind of system of quotas and subsidies? And what lessons can we learn from the success of some of the Canadian global hits like Murdoch Mysteries, for example, or Orphan Black? Here to help us answer those questions and to navigate the TV landscape are four very experienced and knowledgeable Canadian TV executives. I'll just quickly introduce them. To my left, Natalie Clermont is Director of Programme Management for the Canada Media Fund. She invests hundreds of millions of dollars in Canadian TV and digital content. So, Natalie, I hope you brought lots of business cards with you today. You might need them later. Yes. Gav Lindo is Chief of Staff and Senior Director of Programming at the CBC. They are Canada's English language public broadcaster, and Gav oversees their programming, which includes shows like Anne with an E, which some of you might have seen. It's a co-production with Netflix. The rather familiar sounding, The Great Canadian Baking Show, which rings a bell, sounds familiar. Next to Gav, Jean-Philippe Normando, COO of Incendo. Incendo are one of Canada's leading independent drama producers and distributors. Very active in the co-pro space, and were recently the Canadian partner on the big epic period drama from France, Versailles, which we'll talk about later. And last, but by no means least, Beverly Schenkin. Beverly is VP of Content and General Manager of the TV division at Zuma Media. They're a multi-platform media company that targets viewers aged 45 and over. And it turns out they are big fans of British TV, which we'll be talking about later. So welcome, thank you for joining us. Thanks to our partners for this session, the Government of Canada. As you can tell, I'm not Canadian, but I work for a Canadian production company in London called Real One Entertainment. I've been there for about a year now, and it's kind of been a crash course in the Canadian TV marketplace for me, so hopefully I'm well placed to lead this discussion, but I would encourage you to not be shy. We will leave time at the end for questions. Apparently the app isn't working, so we'll have to do it the old-fashioned way. Just raise a hand. We have one microphone, so either speak very loudly or we'll try and get the mic to you as soon as we can. Anyway, to kick things off, Natalie, I wanted to start with you because in your position you have a great overview of the Canadian market, and I know that you have a video that maybe is a nice scene setter, so if we can play our first VT and then we'll get into the Q&A. So Natalie, as we saw there, lots of reasons for...
Everybody who's walking on the street is working in the audiovisual industry.
Really, they're all extras. Lots of reasons for producing with Canada, and the Canadian production industry is booming partly because of that. I guess a big factor is the incentives that exist there, which you oversee the CMF, or you work at the CMF. Could you give us, and I know you've got some slides which will help as well. I'm going to pass you the clicker.
Thanks.
And if you could kind of give us a quick explanation of really how that CMF funding works, because it's really in partnership with the broadcasters very much, isn't it?
Absolutely. So the Canada Media Fund is a funding agency operating across Canada, and we are financed by both the Government of Canada and the cable, satellite and IPTV industries. So thanks to them, we have an annual budget of approximately $350 million to spend on Canadian content. And for sure, Canadian content includes co-production. That's one thing for sure.
And I think in pounds, that's around 210 million.
Something like that, yeah, exactly. We are at the CMF supporting television and digital media. Our sister organization, Telefilm Canada, is responsible for the feature film, both fiction and documentary. But at the CMF, we are supporting television, so drama, documentaries, children and youth programming, and variety and performing arts, and digital media, so games for all platforms, VR, AR, cultural application, and different web series and things like that. So on this slide, what you see is a bit what the funding ecosystem that exists in Canada. So the CMF is for sure part of it, but we have other funding agencies that are working at the national level, but also in each of the 10 provinces and territories. So when you come to Canada, you can partner with a Canadian producer, and the Canadian producer have access to many different funding bodies. To get access to funding for the CMF, however, you need to have a Canadian broadcaster on board, so your Canadian partner will need to find a broadcaster first, and this broadcaster will trigger all the funding in Canada, including CBC and Zoomer that are part of the CMF ecosystem. So in each province, or almost all of them, have provincial tax credit. There's a tax credit at the federal level as well. And these tax credits are dedicated for Canadian content. And there's other types of tax credit. If you only come to shoot in Canada or to do post-production in Canada, you can access the service tax credit, but most of it is for Canadian content. We do co-production. We finance co-production for sure, both minority and majority co-production. They are eligible to all programs as long as they are recognized by the relevant authorities. In Canada, it's Telefilm Canada who is responsible to certify the co-production, and in UK, obviously, it's the British Film Institute. We have over 60 treaties with different countries, and UK is one of them. All calculations for sure are made on the Canadian share of the budget, and as you saw in the previous slide, Canadian producers have access to many different sources of financing. With UK in particular, what you see here is the results of the past few years. So we are investing in approximately, not we are investing, but in Canada we are co-producing official co-production approximately 60 per year. And you see that for UK it's the average, it's 17, but 17 is a bit high because of the first years of these statistics, because as you can see, since 2015 the numbers are much lower than they used to be. So we need to incentivize you to work with Canadian, because for us it's a normal fit, but it seems that it is not showing in the statistic as much as we could see them. So
who would be the most, would France, I'm assuming, be the biggest co-production partner?
France is the biggest co-production, UK is the second one.
Okay.
It's approximately 28% of the co-production that are made with UK, but with France, even for English-speaking production, not with French necessarily. As you can see, most of what we are supporting in Canada with the UK is documentary. 66% of the productions are in documentary, then children and youth, then drama. So I think there's a lot of work to do to bring drama in the ecosystem. The drama that we are doing are more with Ireland right now than with England.
So Vikings, I guess, is the big...
Absolutely. It's one example of it. Yes. And I think Tudor also was...
the Tudors, yes. Yeah.
So we need to bring these numbers up for sure. And that's one of the reasons why we are here today. So that's about it.
Yeah, I was surprised when I was looking back at the recent drama co-productions, and apologies, I know the drama space well, and we will definitely try and focus on factual as well. But on the drama side, I think looking back, there was Houdini and Doyle, which was a few years ago, and then Combat Hospital, which was a co-pro, and I think, I'm not even sure if there was a UK broadcaster on Combat Hospital. I remember being pitched it. So yeah, not so much activity, and I mean, do you get any sense of why there is more happening in the factual space than drama?
It's hard to say. I think maybe my colleagues can jump in. For sure, there's a lot of incentive in Canada, but we are far away from the UK, so maybe the UK producers are working more easily with their neighbors in Europe. I don't know, maybe that's... and other European countries have their own incentives, so maybe it's more advantageous for them to work, or easier for them to work with European countries. But, you know, Canada is still very, not rich in terms of the support we can provide, but we are very lucky to have that type of money to support the content. So.
And I guess one of the things that I think in the UK we often kind of hear about Canadian content and the point system and kind of get slightly scared that it's quite complex. But actually, if am I right in thinking as a treaty co-production, your UK creatives and crew are basically considered Canadian?
Absolutely.
So you... and maybe, I mean, again, we could spend all day discussing the point system, and we don't want to send everyone to sleep. But I guess it'd be useful to just quickly talk about what's this criteria for Canadian content?
In fact, with all the treaties, or most of the treaties, there's a point system where most of the key creative needs to be Canadian or with the foreign country with which you are working. Sorry for my... so, you know, you have to have your director, editor, scriptwriters, performing the lead.
Yeah, the cast, yes.
Editor and musician. So you have to share this position between the two co-producing countries, and it's very strict and based on how much money you are bringing to the table. So if it's a 60-40 co-production for Canada being the majority, for example, this position needs to be filled at 60% roughly to Canadian in this key position. So I think there's some flexibility in that, and when you talk with the British Film Institute and Telefilm, there's always solutions that can be found, but it has to abide by the treaty, and the treaty is in place for many, many years with UK. I don't think there is any negotiation right now to makes it more flexible. So it's quite rigid, the old-fashioned way. You know, television, film, digital media is not included in the treaty right now, like other countries with which we have more recent agreement. So, you know, the rules are what they are, but I think there's always a way to find a solution to work together.
And just one other thing quickly, there are, outside of the co-productions and the funding that you do through the broadcasters, you have various development initiatives, including ones with the BAI in Ireland and the Screen Northern Ireland. Can you just mention a little bit about how those do cover digital as well as TV, don't they?
Absolutely. So for 4 or 5 years now, we've created these matching fund that we call. So we are putting money agency to agency with foreign agency. In fact, CMF and BAI in Ireland, for example, we are putting money together in a fund to incentivize co-production for both countries or co-development with both countries. Some are for television, some are for digital media, and some are for both development, production. So we really want to incentivize co-production because we feel that's the way, it's a good way for financing your projects since the financing is shrinking a bit everywhere. So co-production is a good avenue, and it also brings you a new audience for your content. So it's very important to incentivize co-production because that's the way to go for the future. That's one thing for sure.
Gabe, as a public broadcaster, you have a remit to reflect your local audience and to kind of do things that are distinctively Canadian. But at the same time, you're also having to think about the wider international market and look at content that travels beyond your borders as well. How do you achieve that balance of being, fulfilling that remit as a Canadian public broadcaster, but also creating content that can work internationally?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly focusing on Canadian stories is a big part of our mandate as a public broadcaster. But in terms of the types of stories that we're telling, certainly on the drama side, the scale and the cost of content today is just not possible to do it alone. We have to. I don't think we have a single drama that is not a co-production that doesn't have international financing as part of the plan. And quite frankly, at the scale and the level of the cost of production, the Crown, one season of The Crown is basically our total programming budget, right? So when you're up against that scale of content and the cost, you just have to partner. So that's a big part of our DNA in the last few years. And you mentioned Anne with an E, which is a quintessential Canadian story, but it was also the 4th most binged show on Netflix in the world. So it certainly found an audience and resonated, even though it's set in the east coast of Canada and is this really iconic story that is very Canadian, but also is, I think, can translate to other territories. And then you mentioned Murdoch Mysteries earlier. That's a show that we've done with UK TV, and it's consistently, it's in its 12th season now. It's been sold in over 110 territories around the world. It's been one of the highest rated dramas in Canada for the past number of years. It's one of our top rated dramas at CBC. So I think that I would say it's not mutually exclusive. I think that telling stories that resonate in Canada are increasingly stories that resonate globally as well. And I think as part of our development process and as part of the decision to greenlight shows, we're very much thinking about who is the partner, what's the territory that is going to come in a big way to make the show happen. It's definitely, the global lens of our shows is something that we think very much about.
And I suppose kind of the flip side of that is that, interestingly, it seems that Canadian audiences and your audience for the CBC do seem to enjoy English content, the kind of British sensibility, whether that's, I'm amazed that you still have Coronation Street on CBC in Canada, and then you have Bake Off and then the Canadian version of Bake Off. So it seems that there is an appetite.
There is a massive appetite. And one of the things, you mentioned a number of those shows that, Coronation Street is something that it's basically a big part of our programming strategy. British content, UK content, across the board from Scotland, Ireland, it just resonates with Canadian audiences. We've acquired about 1,400 hours of content over the last 3 years from the UK, and we've launched a streaming service this past January. We've had catch-up available for a number of years, but this is the first time we were actually going to market with a Canada-focused streaming service. And so what that means is that we have a lot more flexibility outside of the linear schedule to acquire additional content. So a big part of our thinking is, look, we're going to bring the best of Canadian content to audiences, but also the best that we can find from around the world. And so we're definitely ramping up the amount of acquisition content over the next few years, and most of it's going to be coming from the UK.
Great. Now is probably a good moment to, I know you've got a little show reel, which is for your, I think your new season, upcoming season on CBC. So if we could show the next VT, please.
I came to apologize.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Sorry to bother you. I'm so sorry.
Sorry, Doctor, are we not done?
I'm sorry. I didn't have a coffee and I smell like a meatball.
I'm so sorry.
I am sorry.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry. Sir.
I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Sorry.
I'm sorry I'm not a condom.
I'm sorry for intruding.
Then don't.
Okay, I'll be over here.
Frankie Drake. Pleased to meet you.
Other days, I see a dog in a baby stroller and a baby on a leash.
Remind me never to mess with you.
Never mess with you.
Hey, partner, what's the good word?
There's a dead guy in room 4.
Drop that.
It starts you off here.
There's an actual manhunt for me! Yeah. We keep it moving. All day, all night. Yeah, we ain't stopping. You know. We keep it moving. All day, all night. Yeah, ain't no stopping us. Yeah, drop that. There's a boat right out there!
Could you pass the juice, please?
We keep it moving. All day, all night. Yeah, ain't no stopping us.
Because you know that I'm a badass mother.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Yay!
So would most of that programming that we've seen there have benefited from CMF funding, would you say?
Not at all. No, just kidding. No, yeah, a lot of it would be.
Yes. Yeah. And again, lots of great examples of scripted successes there. But in the kind of factual space, again, CBC are active as a co-producer with the UK and other markets. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting is sort of the elephant in the room for us is that we have the United States market south of us, which so much of that content gets sort of piped into to our market. And so particularly on the format side, we've, as the public broadcaster, we've shied away from taking US formats because we want to have a bit more of a distinctive identity to sort of provide an offer that's different than the American content. And so we're very much actively looking, and you'll see at different markets, our folks here looking for British formats because those are ones that we definitely like. We still have Dragon's Den on the air, but we've as you mentioned, we have the great Canadian Bake Off that it's in the second season now. Just wrapped up filming, and we also.
Does that translate to a Canadian audience? Is there a kind of the same passion for baking and Victoria sponges that we have here in the UK?
Yeah, it's one of our most popular shows, the British version is also very popular. We have that on a linear channel, and also it does very well on our streaming service. So the formats from the UK are definitely something that we are always on the lookout for.
Great. Jean-Philippe, as a producer, if I could bring you in, I mean, you work with US studios and UK content, European content providers as well. I guess selling content into Canada, but you're also an active producer and co-producer as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Incendo works with international partners on dramas?
Well, Incendo started off as a boutique production companies specializing in television films and high-end television films. And we've moved gradually towards high-end drama series. Versailles was a second endeavor of ours. Crusoe in the mid-2000s was a co-production with South Africa. Versailles for us was a big challenge. We were a minority co-producer with two French companies who at the time were independents like us. One was bought by TF1, the other one is now part of the Vivendi group. So we were kind of the lone small co-producer at the end. But it was a great challenge considering that it was a French-Canada co-production with British writers. Most of the cast was British.
Yep.
And we were a 20% co-producer, bringing in about 35% of the creative on the show, which talks a lot about the Canadian talent that we can bring. For example, the directors on both seasons 1 and 2 for the last 3 episodes were Canadians, which was kind of a big challenge. You're finishing off a big, high-end, high-budget series, trying to bring it into the next season, and they trusted the Canadian directors, even though we were the minority co-producers. It was a big challenge. It was, and it did put us on the map. I would say having a show like Versailles that did actually really well internationally, and it really encouraged us to ramp up development on international drama series. So right now we have one actually with we're developing with a UK company with Ben Grass's Grass Film on a sci-fi, very ambitious science fiction series.
Yep. I know the project. It's a great project.
It's very exciting. We are in development with Gaumont on another show. One of our shows that we've developed in Canada internally will be heading to Amazon in the near future. So we're very excited about what's happening and moving along. But it's still a very important challenge for us as a Canadian co-producer to be able to play in this now drama series environment that is just so challenging. The budgets are just so high if you want to have a series that can be out there on an international scale, and that's a challenge that we're trying to figure out with the Canadian Media Fund, who was a big partner on Versailles actually, has a great help to us.
So that's interesting that as you said, a French series written by a couple of Brits, Simon Mirren and David Wollstonecraft, mainly UK cast, but it was able, because it was a treaty co-production and because you were bringing in Canadian directors and doing post-production, yes, it qualified and was able to access CMF funding.
And you talked about the post-production, and the incentives are there definitely for post-production. Any type of, I would say, heavy hitters with a lot of visual effects. It becomes very interesting to bring in Canadian producers, because not only for the monetary aspects. I mean, if you base your partnership on a financial co-production, these projects usually don't work very long. But if you're looking really at bringing in the creative aspects of it, it can be very interesting. And just in Montreal, and it's funny because Montreal has now very interesting, and Toronto's the same thing, but very interesting facilities. I just walked in here and the first thing I saw was the Jack Ryan reel, which a big portion of it was actually shot in Montreal.
Right.
And a lot of the visual effects were done in Montreal. And now we have 7 or 8 actually big UK visual effects companies based now in Montreal, and some have over 250 employees. So from Framestore to Cinesight to MPC are now established on the ground. So it makes it a lot easier as well to work with the British environment. And I'm surprised that it's
yeah. So going back to what the data from Natalie, as a producer, why do you think there isn't more drama being co-produced between the UK and Canada?
It's a good question. It's tough to find, a fit for co-production. I think we have to start earlier off. I think in the past what's happened a lot was the project was very well developed going forward, and then a lot of times trying to find in the Canadian partner to bring in that, because there's so much, there's some money there for on the CMF side and the tax credits, kind of bringing it as a financial co-producer.
So it's almost more as an afterthought.
Pardon?
It's almost more as an afterthought. The producers have just assumed, we get a nice chunk of money out of Canada, and then they come to you very late in the day.
Yeah. But now there's less and less money coming from as you talked about, your budgets compared to just one series, which is the Crown. On the broadcaster side, it becomes more and more difficult to bring that kind of financial or only financial contribution into a project. So I think in order to make it work now, we really need to start developing it on an early stage together and kind of change our mindset in how we're going to build that co-production. And really on the creative side, that's where it needs to start, and not on the end financial side. I think if we can get that figured out, hopefully these numbers will go up and come back to what it was a couple of years ago.
Great. Beverly, if I could bring you in, a little bit like Gabe was saying with his audience, your audience for Zoomer Media has a real passion for English content, both scripted and non-scripted as well. Can you tell us a little bit? It might help if you explain what a Zoomer is, actually, for our audience.
Zoomer, the company was created by our patron, the CEO of the company, and he calls it a boomer with zip. So we actually are a multimedia company that embraces Canada's aging population. So whereas a lot of broadcasters are trying to skew younger, we recognize that linear viewers are actually boomers, and we're trying to change the thinking so that linear will have a longer runway. So for our channels to match the company profile, we cater specifically to an aging demographic, both with factual and with dramatic series. So on the factual side, we invest in independent production, and all of that is documentary, and the documentaries are basically things like A User's Guide to Cheating Death is one of the series. We have...
which I think Sky Vision distribute.
Sky Vision distributes. The Canadian producer has an output with Sky, and we're doing the Canadian format, shooting now of 50 Ways to Kill Your, we're calling it Mama. I've bought 50 Ways to Kill Your Mammy, British version, aired it on the channel, and now we're doing the Canadian version with famous Canadian people and their parent in the series. And we have a lot of drama too.
Yeah, I mean, you're buying hundreds of hours of UK drama, you were telling me.
We're the exclusive broadcaster home of Poldark, Victoria. I had Daunton, I have EastEnders. I mean, the list goes on. Really, we're the ones who buy those things. We seek them out because they rate well. Doc Martin, for example, is the highest rated scripted series I have on the network.
But interesting, I mean, as the UK, like many other markets, has kind of shifted towards the kind of darker serialized drama, you were telling me it's a lot harder to find stuff that works for your audience.
This sort of true crime procedural drama that's all very dark and dreary is not working, and what concerns me is that it's kind of become like the US and the UK. When a certain drama format works, everybody does it, and the same thing happens when you go to LA screenings. There's a theme every year, and so I'm hoping that we'll start to get back to something a little gentler. There are some things in daytime that are being produced for BBC that could work for me.
I'm sure the pendulum will swing.
I'll find things.
Yeah, I often hear UK writers and producers saying it's so frustrating that they struggle to find commissioners here for those kind of
there is a swing. I'm seeing the changes. Definitely, I'm seeing it. I'm hoping little bits and pieces will start to fall in my lap. I haven't bought any less, so I'm finding it. And this particular broadcast year coming up, because there weren't enough new series that fit my remit, I actually went back and bought some classic oldies. I bought Monarch of the Glen. And I'm going to try Hetty Wainthropp Investigates.
Right. Excellent. Well, on the factual front, you mentioned a couple of, your own original productions, but are you also open to UK producers coming to you with ideas for your audience?
Definitely. In fact, the highest rated factual 1 hour documentary in the Strand, it's a Monday night primetime Strand, was Fabulous Fashionistas from Channel 4. That is still the best rated one. So they're uplifting. It's uplifting stories about aging as opposed to, I did try 100-year-old drivers, but it was a little bit, it didn't work. So really the audience is 71% female. The median age is over the age of 61. They're somewhat conservative, but there is a big expat audience on Vision TV, and they like stories where they see themselves represented. Penelope Keith's Hidden Villages, in fact, is another example of highly rated factual series. And so if someone could pitch me something like that, where maybe we could look at villages in Canada and the UK and do a co-pro, I'd be down with that.
So pretty much most of More 4's schedule must be kind of pretty close to what you're looking for.
Well, it's not all, though.
It's kind of take a national treasure, put them in send them off to.
But 4 is changing now, so I
who knows
what I'm seeing happening on 4 in their daytime actually might work for me. Yeah, oddly enough.
And in terms of we talked about, or Jean-Philippe was talking about the kind of challenges of big budget drama, and I guess the expectation, or maybe the myth in the past that Canada was just going to be like this kind of nice piece. I mean, I've seen so many finance plans where there's been this kind of big line in the budget for Canada, and you were saying, I guess like the others, that expectation is just unrealistic, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I mean, there is an audience, there's an appetite, but.
There's an audience. Straight up, you have to look at it as something extra. If you really want some good money, get it from Gave. If Gave doesn't want it, then you'll come to me. That's basically the chain of command in terms of who has more money to spend on things. But we are very quietly investing in a lot of UK content for our channels, and we don't intend to stray from it because it works for an aging audience.
One of the challenges that I've found as dealing with the Canadian market is that just the consolidation and the fact that really, obviously, as you said, you've got the CBC doing a lot, you've got Bell, and then you've got some smaller groups, but there's not a whole lot. Again, I'm focusing a little bit on drama, but there's not that many places. And given that Natalie, your funding is kind of tied to the broadcasters, so how does that consolidation, and I guess that's one factor, but there's also the fact that those traditional broadcasters are also seeing their revenues decline. So how does that impact the way that the CMF finances programming? Or how do you adapt and evolve to kind of that?
For sure, it's a challenge, and we are trying for years now, and we are about to do it, to bring in the system, the digital platforms that are owned by the television and the cable industries. So I think there will be more money coming from these players, whether they are partnering with the traditional broadcaster or if they are triggering by themselves. But I think that the more platforms we can allow to trigger our money, the better the chances are that we will get more projects. But still, these platforms, they don't necessarily have a lot of money right now in terms of revenues and their licensing budget. So we will see, because we don't really know them very well up to now, but in the next year or so we should be able to allow them to come to us with projects.
I know that we are rapidly approaching the end, so if there are questions from the audience, please raise a hand and we will get a microphone to you. I've certainly got more, but if anyone has any questions, if you want to pick our brains, excellent. There's a lady here, second row back.
Hi there. if we want to start building relationships in terms of co-funding, what's the sort of best route into that? Is it directly through you? How do we start setting up those contacts, particularly thinking CBS and the Zoomer media? Where should we take the conversation?
You can send a pitch directly to me. We're a small company, so I have 5 jobs. And then I would look at the creative on the pitch and try to see if I can partner you with a Canadian producer if you wanted to access additional Canadian funding outside of just what I would pay for the project. We have on our website a producer's area where it explains our call for submission. It's really basic. It's not a difficult thing. It just kind of gives you an overview of the types of things I'm looking for. But people actually pitch me directly. I don't have a person.
I'm almost apologizing for having people to do this, but but I would say 2 things. I think the first is that I mean you're certainly welcome to pitch us, and if you see me or others at markets, certainly set up those meetings, and there's an opportunity there. What I would say is that we have a really large development slate, and so what often happens is we're investing a year or 2 into a project, and then there are so many great stories and projects out there that I almost feel like the best bet is getting in as soon as possible, as opposed to bringing a project that's almost finished. And so either coming to us directly, and then similarly, we can think about who might be a good partner for you to work with. But alternatively, if you have an opportunity to establish relationships with Canadian producers as well, that's also a great way to move forward. And then they can bring that project to us, because we would, in many cases, already have a pre-existing relationship. But I think the key takeaway is the sooner the better, because if we've been involved earlier, we're more vested in the project, and it's more likely to move forward.
And I guess they can, Jean-Philippe, you're open for business. You're keen to build those relationships.
Mm-hmm. Actually, if you partnered with Jean-Philippe and then pitched me, that's good too, because I buy from this company, so it just depends on the scale of the project.
Yes. How it can fit.
Any more questions from the audience?
At the back, right there.
Hi there. I found this panel super interesting, especially because I'm a big fangirl of Anne with an E in particular. And I do see part of the success of that is because it's based in literature and has a really good established literary history that has international and global scale. So I was just curious, in terms of your creative practice, do you guys have direct connections with Canadian publishers or even UK publishers to try to develop more content in that way?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, our development slate right now, a significant portion of it is based on source material, and it's definitely something we want to do more of. I know in Ontario, we're looking at trying to find ways to actually create opportunities to work closer with publishers. We don't have an existing. Do you work in publishing, or you do? Oh, we have a
we
very
get
similar,
points for that.
We have a similar program called Page to Screen as well in Canada. So I'd love to chat with you afterwards. Yeah.
I guess there's, Margaret Atwood is another big example. There's only so many more. I mean, she's written a lot, so there's probably quite a few more adaptations to be done from her.
But it was built into the Let's Talk TV decision, which is a regulatory decision that if you base a project from a Canadian piece of literature, there's bonus points.
Excellent, right. Good tip. We'll be mining that Canadian IP. We unfortunately have come to the end of time for the panel. So hopefully when we come back here in maybe a year or two's time, we will see that co-production number increase dramatically.
Yeah.
And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.